G'day. I have been running through the Lost Mine of Phandelver for a couple of years now. So many of you may be familiar with it. Starter dungeon for 5th Ed. Surprisingly good dungeon for a starter dungeon. So the 4th Ed one was a 1 or 2 session campaign, whereas this one is all the way up to 5th level. It's quite detailed, has a number of dungeons within it. It's a really good campaign. So if you're not familiar with it, and you're getting anyone started on D&D, it might be worth checking out. So when I was starting it off, I actually thought there's some other stuff I would like to add here. I actually think this is a really good campaign, but there's other flavour elements and other ideas and other themes and other background details that I want to add in here that aren't here. And I thought, having done the work for it, I would actually share it with the internet and see what people thought. And if anyone listens to what I'm doing and says, yeah, I'd love to use that as is, then fine, go knock yourself out. But the reason I was doing it actually was to get us thinking about how can we add flavour to the stuff we're doing? How can we kind of take standard set-piece dungeons that we're working with and say, all right, I've got these other themes that I want to bring in the future, or there's stuff for specific characters that I want to bring in, or I want to change the setting in certain specific ways. So how can I do that? Just getting us thinking about those kind of conversations. So I thought I would offer this up as a bit of a thought piece, but people are welcome to pirate it if they want. So I'm going to read out a few pieces that I wrote basically as supplemental details for the start of Phandelver. So there is a big picture lore of the world piece. There is a plot hook for the characters, and I've actually done a couple of specific plot hooks. So I'm shaking the camera there a bit. Specific plot hooks for a number of the PCs that came in. So I won't run through it all here, but let's just start with the big picture, how it changes the Forgotten Realms piece that I did. So before we started the campaign, each player got a written copy of this, and I also read it out at the beginning of the campaign. So this is what we got. 4 centuries ago, the Forgotten Realms were awash with mighty empires, vast civilizations, and world-changing magics. It was a realm like no other. Then came the long night. Long prophecy, but rarely heeded, the long night was a century-long age of nightmares that almost ended the realms. Greater demons rose and were only barely defeated. Ancient dragons awoke. The mountains spat lumps of necrotic darkness that woke the dead. Empires fell overnight. The sun gave no light for 10 years. Entire races such as the hulking Goliaths, the crystal-bodied Shardmind, and the mysterious Githzerai were all but wiped out. Continents sank, mountains rose, and thousands of heroes, great and small, sacrificed themselves for the hope that there might be something left when the nightmare ended. And then, one day, it did end. That was 300 years ago. The Forgotten Realms did survive. Although a mere whisper of their former glory, mortal kind survived and slowly began rebuilding. The great horrors of the long night were vanquished, crumbled to dust, or returned to the shadows. Now the sentient races survive in pockets and hamlets, islands amidst an ocean of wild, lawless lands filled with bandits and monsters. A few cities, such as Neverwinter on the Sword Coast, stand as bastions of civilization, echoes of the Grand Age before the long night. But beyond the reach of such cities and their guards, there is no law. Now, why would I want to add this into what's a fairly well-crafted dungeon and world behind it? Well, there was a few things. One, I wanted to have a bit of flavour to the world. So things like as they're travelling along, I wanted to come across statues that are echoes of things that happened from before the Long Dark. And give players a feeling of, oh, I know how this fits into the world. I know how this all works. And so sort of bring them into the history by giving them something a bit new and a bit unique that they can think about as they start. It's one idea to hang things on, to get set up on. I also don't know the Forgotten Realms very well. So I know worlds like Greyhawk much better, and while I thought about maybe transplant the dungeon over there, I actually thought I don't mind the idea of using this map, this world that it's set in, and starting to bring in themes from that as I find out more about it. But I also don't really want people going, oh, well, I'm going to go to the specific town because I know the specific sage is there, and using their back knowledge of the Forgotten Realms as an advantage. And I didn't want people kind of going, oh, but that's not how Neverwinter works. They don't have lords like that. It's a different setup. Their council is different to what you're describing. So what I wanted to be able to do is use bits and pieces of lore that I liked, but also if someone says, oh, but that's not how the Council of Neverwinter works, I can say, oh, it worked that way before the Long Dark. This is a different thing. So I wanted to give that very clear flag of, this is not necessarily the realms that you know. I also loved the idea of having things like the Githzerai and the Goliaths, which are races that are in the lore, but I didn't necessarily want them to be on every street corner. I quite like the idea of all elves and dwarves and orcs being the sort of core of it, and those being exotic and you might encounter them. So I kind of like the idea of just flagging some of those as, yeah, they were around. There's still a few, but you need a reason why you have one. Like, why has this one survived, and what's its story? And that could be hooking them into the whole history of the Long Dark. And the last thing was actually something about the way D&D works that I wanted to bring into my game, in that I always struggle a bit with the idea that this 4 or 5 PCs are so renowned, like they end up being these figures that, the game will talk about them saving the world or saving the universe at different times. And it's always odd in the sense of, there's mighty empires here, there are armies of thousands that are marching around, nations will dispatch 500 men to sort out some problem. And there's, great wizards. You might have, if you've ever been to Greyhawk, some of the great wizards that do the spells like Mordecai and things like that live in that world. So there's this sense of, why aren't they sorting out some of these problems? So there's always this sense of you're just one figure in a bunch, and why is your story so significant? I really like having this sense of, there really isn't a lot of lore here. The big cities have maybe a day's reach of influence. Neverwinter might have 300 soldiers, and that's the most it can muster. And so if something goes bad, or if there's threats, they need to keep them close to home, and they can't really send 50 people off to do something. And this sense that outside of that, really there is no law. You've got one day from any major town, and outside of that, no one's coming for you. So caravans need escorts, and you do meet wandering monsters, and there's nothing to stop them. There's no guards policing the roads beyond a certain point. And that means that a band of 4 to 6 warriors is a pretty significant factor. A town like Phandelver, they don't have anything to stop 20 thugs just taking over. There's nothing that they have to offer. They have one ex-hero out in the orchard, and there's not a lot really, but 6 well-seasoned warriors come into town and hit hard and fast. You can overturn the thugs. This can change the face of everything, and this can be the heroes that make the difference. And I really like that idea, and so I really wanted to bring in that element here, that the realms is not a stable place. There is not much left here. You might get big cities that have a short range of influence, and they might have a few special services in them, but other than that, everyone's kind of holding on with their fingernails, and your party can make the difference. So yeah, that's why I wanted to not completely change, but just tweak and adjust how the Forgotten Realms is fitting together and make it my own and put a stamp on it that this is, for players, this isn't necessarily the realms and it's got elements that might be interesting that you haven't seen previously. So well, I don't know what you guys would think of this. I don't know if it's an idea you like to play with or if it gives you inspiration for doing other things of your own. But that's the big history piece. In the next post, I'll do something about the specific hook story for the Rockseeker brothers and how you basically get the PCs involved. Because I wanted to do a bit more work with that. But I would love it if people want to make comments on whether they think this is a good or a bad idea or what it inspires them to think of. But thanks for listening.